Welcome to AstroChat with Anne Sundell, Kimberly Williams, and Monica Anna. We are three professional astrologers living in three separate countries, coming together every new and full moon to share our 3 points of view on astrology. Whether you enjoy deep dives into the current transits or you are just beginning to learn about astrology for the first time, there is a place for you here. All that is required is an appreciation for astrology, along with a respect for the various traditions within it. So grab a mug of coffee, your favorite cup of tea, or any other beverage of your choice, and join us for a chat on the astrology of the next 2 weeks. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the AstroChat with myself, Kimberly Williams, Monica Anna, and Anne Sundell. We're three astrologers from three different countries coming together every full and new moon to talk about the astrology, the transits, the what's happening, and share our points of view. Today, we're going to be focusing mostly on the upcoming new moon in Gemini, which will be happening on June 6th here in the central time zone of the United States. That'll be at 7:37 a.m. Over across the pond, that'll be at 1:37 in the afternoon for Great Britain. And that would make it, I believe, 3:37 in the afternoon over in Finland. A couple of things that are happening between this new moon and the next full moon. Our next full moon won't be until June 21st at 1 degrees of Capricorn. So we're looking at from June 6th to June 21st. But we're going to start just a few days before because some of the transits happening right before the new moon are still in play, right? They're still in orb, they're still happening, and we'll be talking about them when we pull up the chart. So let's start at the beginning of the month, June 2nd. We have the exact trine between Jupiter in Gemini and Pluto, currently in Aquarius. On the 3rd, we'll have Mercury moving into Gemini, and it's moving at quick speed because we're going to see it go into Gemini and Cancer in the course of this 1 month. On the 4th, we'll have Venus cazimi, making that exact conjunction to the sun. And then on the 6th, we have our new moon, which will be taking place at 16 degrees of Gemini. Interestingly, that same day, June 6th, the moon is going out of bounds. And it will be out of bounds from the 6th to the 10th, so approximately 4 days. If you're not already familiar with what out of bounds means, you can go back to some of our prior episodes where we've talked about it extensively. On the 8th of June, Mars moves into Taurus. On the 9th, we have our first crescent moon. On the 11th, interestingly, both Venus and Mercury go out of bounds together. On the 14th, we'll have our first quarter moon, if you like to work with the moon's 8 phases. On the 17th, Venus enters Cancer and Mercury enters Cancer. They're really traveling close together this month. On the 14th, we'll have the first quarter moon. By the 17th, Venus and Mercury enter Cancer together within a few hours of each other. On the 18th, we'll have that gibbous moon where she's almost full. If you work with asteroids, on the 19th, Vesta is going into Leo. By the 20th, we'll have the sun's monthly ingress to its next sign, entering Cancer at 3:51 in the afternoon. And here's the second time this month that the moon will go out of bounds again from the 20th to the 24th. And the following day, June 21st, we have our full moon in Capricorn. So you'll have to join us for our next episode to learn more about that. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe, and if you're watching us on YouTube, the follow buttons. If you haven't already on your podcast platform, set up reminders, please do so because we come out every 2 weeks at the new and full moon, and that way you'll make sure to catch our next episode. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anne, who's going to lead us into talking about the Sabian symbol.
Thank you. And this Sabian symbol is for 17 degrees of Gemini. And it says the head of a robust youth changes into that of a mature thinker. for this Gemini moon with a lot of ideas and thoughts and how we perceive life, how we understand our surrounding, what goals we have, what we want to do. There's a saying here that a person is good enough where you can change your mind about things. And this might be a good moon to also change your mind or perceive something in a new way, understand things in a new way, or maybe adjust some plans or some ways of thinking. So I think that this is to mature your thoughts is also something that might be quite good for this moon also when we're going to talk more about the aspects later on. What do you think?
I personally like that it's this change from the youth and that frivolity, if you will, to maturity. And we usually, when we're thinking about archetypes in astrology, we think about Gemini as this kind of free-spirited, very youthful person, and then that maturity comes with Capricorn. But when we're actually looking at all the archetypes, they learn from one another. You can't have maturity in Capricorn if you haven't done your lessons and your classes and your learning in Gemini. So I like that this new moon, that sign of Gemini is highlighted, that yes, we connect, yes, we network, and yes, we learn, and yes, we get the data that we need, get the information that we need, but that is actually something that helps us mature. Our connections, our networks, the things that we learn and experience actually help us mature, or at least should help us mature. So I like that there is the Sabian symbol speaks to that, because it's so easy to think about the Gemini of in that youthful, kind of free-spirited, very carefree kind of way. But actually the job that Gemini does, it's creating that foundation to learn and hopefully through that to mature.
Totally. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful metaphor for Gemini because it is so easy to think about a sign or a planet in terms of those archetypes. And sometimes I think we can fall into the pit of unintentionally getting narrow tunnel vision, narrowing our vision of labeling and forgetting that each sign and each planet can encompass a couple of archetypes, not just one. And it's so easy to remember Gemini as youthful and social and perhaps make assumptions about some frivolity there. And it's so much more. It can be those things, but it is also so much more. That Sabian symbol of the robust youth becoming the mature minded person. I keep thinking about a workshop that Demetra George did once upon a time about the cycles, the paths of Mercury, and how there's the psychopomp Mercury in its retrograde stage, the morning star Mercury of youth and adolescence, and maybe a little trickster, the on top of Mount Olympus when it's conjunct the sun, the evening star Mercury, who was the Mercury who would come in all of the myths, come and help humans, would bring the gifts of the gods and help humans on their journey, and how, there's this flavor of moving from, our youth to our more sagely mindset. And due to the fact that this moon is in Gemini, it feels so encapsulating for me, especially since, as we're going to talk about, we have so many planets in Gemini, as we'll talk about in a moment. So I'm loving that. And it also feels just hopeful and positive, which right now in the world and the climate of the environment and the climate of politics and the world we're all living in, that just feels like a really good thing to hang on to, that we're in that process of a maturing. I like it. So let's talk about the fact that we have a new moon in Gemini, the annual occurrence, new moon in Gemini. I both love every year when we have a new moon in Gemini, and I struggle with it too. I think that when the moon is in any of the air signs, it can be challenging, right? Air takes us into our mind, just like that Sabian symbol said. And the moon is often about our emotions and also about our bodies. So, this idea of being embodied can be really difficult. And as we've discussed in so many prior episodes, new moon energy, regardless of the sign it's in, often has this energy of we're receiving, information that we may not know exactly what we're downloading from our higher self or from the universe. Often it's easiest to connect with it through our bodies, through our dreams, in those in between states. It's often not until a few days later, when the moon becomes crescent, that we're ready to take action on the ideas and the impulses and the things coming through. I think it's going to be, especially the fact that we have so many planets accompanying the moon in Gemini on this new moon. I think it's going to be really hard not to be in our heads and to not feel like that very robust, youthful person who's full of ideas. And being full of ideas can often create stress of how do I manifest them? Something I love about Gemini is its ability to, we often say multitask, but I think it's more like multi-think. The ability to have and hold so many ideas simultaneously. There's something about Gemini, the joke over here in the States is having a squirrel moment where you get pulled off track. It's hard to maintain the focus. That to me is the biggest challenge with Gemini is we aren't focused on one thing. It's hard to actually bring things to completion because the energy of Gemini is to think and to think more and to absorb ideas and information and data from our world and from our environment, which naturally makes us question, ask why, think more. And so we can be on this kind of snowball of it's all about the thinking and the ideas and oh, so many things that we want to do. And if we're coming at it from a very youthful, and I often associate youthful with the idea of naive perspective, it could be this moment where we decide, I'm going to do these 50 things. Woo, because I'm full of these ideas. If we take a more mature view and think about how do these ideas move me? What is it that I want to lean into? How do I prioritize? How do I focus? If we embrace the other parts of our chart that have maybe a little Virgo energy, Capricorn energy, a little the Saturnian sides of ourself, if we're able to balance all of these ideas out with these other parts of ourselves, then great, we can take action and move. But if we're only staying in the realm of the mind and we're only doing the ideas, then I think there could be a lot of misdirection, miscommunication. Thinking about the when I think about the fact that the new moon is in Gemini and accompanied by so many planets, I like to think about the planet that rules that. And so I think some of the dysfunctions that can happen with too much Mercury is something that could be strong. But I'll save more of my thoughts on that for when we're actually breaking out the chart. So I think if I was to summarize for me a new moon in Gemini, I'd be thinking about honor what's in the mind, but also there's a chant that keeps coming to me that said the lyrics to that chant are take off your head and put it on the ground. That's how we enter the house of love. Being able to not be overly attached and engaged with all of our thinking and to recognize that this is the time to just absorb data. We don't necessarily have to act on that data. That's a great way of working with the moon in Gemini, opening ourselves to ideas, brainstorming, and this world of ideas, I think, is a wonderful way of being in the Gemini new moon energy. What do you guys think about new moons in Gemini?
Um, I love the fact that Gemini represents the twins and it represents that polarity within us and it represents everything that is this versus the other. And I think, again, with Mercury, Mercury represents our connections, our networking, our capacity to think and connect and communicate. But what Mercury also does, it goes between the worlds. The Gemini has that ability to go between the spiritual side and the material side, the earth versus the heavens, whether it's the Plutonian realm, whether it's the earth realm, whether it's the Olympic? Yeah, it's the realm of the gods on the Olympus, on the Mount Olympus. Mercury could go anywhere without the invitation. He could turn up. There was no doors or barriers that could hold him back. And Again, that idea of the twins, the heavenly twins and the kind of earthly twins, the idea that, again, we are creatures that walk this earth in this body, but we also have a soul. We're made of stardust. We have this kind of embodied experience on this earth, but we also have that experience that can transcend what we experience here. And I think for me, Gemini can remind us of that. There is a trick to it. Obviously, this is an earth sign. So all the earth signs, if we stay too much if in our head, we can miss certain things. But there is an opportunity with the new moon in Gemini to experience different worlds, to collect that data, Kimberly, that you were just talking about as well, but collect it from so many other sources, not just from this plane, so to speak. And I am getting very metaphysical today. I don't know why. But also listening to your soul, trying to reconcile the polarities or dualities within yourself. What is it that your body needs and what is it that your soul needs? And where do they meet in the middle to create something beautiful? Where do they meet and align to actually nourish you as a whole? There's a lot discussion talking about wholeness and approaching to healing. Again, that's another kind of facet of Mercury, isn't it? That healing side, and approach ourselves as a wholeness. It's not just that my liver hurts and I might need a liver surgery or something, but actually, where does that root of the problem is? Is it my attitude to, I don't know, alcohol? Why do I drink alcohol or eat fatty foods or something? Is there a deeper root to that? Is there something with emotion? Is it something with my soul? And that kind of approach to the wholeness, not just like, let's get you a new liver, but what is it at the bottom of what potentially caused that issue? And again, it's not as simple, it's not black and white. It's not, I don't want to say or make anyone to think that, oh my God, if you have a illness, you caused it. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But that idea that when we're looking at the problem, whether it's a simple cold and a cough, or whether it's my throat hurts, trying to expand and see the whole picture. Is it that my throat hurts because maybe there's something that I can't, I'm unable to speak up, and my throat hurts and closing up on me because there's something that metaphorically stuck in my throat and I can't actually say it. And I think this is another thing that can teach us to go in between those polarities and realize they're not opposition, they can be integrated.
There are great thoughts and many sides of this Gemini moon and of Mercury. I think about Gemini moon as renewal in some way and possibilities to see the world in a new way, to experience something new. When I think about Mercury, also like Monika mentioned, Mercury could move through, could go to Hades and back, and he was the only god who could do that. So he has a very wide range to get information from. But it's not only the ideas. I think that also it can bring a lot of different emotions that we might not always understand, or we get like sneak peeks of different kinds of emotions that we might be able to understand in a way, or just let come and go and get knowledge. Oh, I also have this. I also can experience this thing in another way. So it might also be on the emotional level. But all with this, all ideas, all this like what we want to do, and we get maybe the youthful way, or like I want to do everything. I want to concretize all these ideas I have. And of course, it's not possible, maybe, but still, it's very important to also. Mercury is speeding up our nervous system, and it makes things go fast. And we need to find a way to live in that rhythm, in that time of the Mercury, and be able to pick what's important, or what's important for us right now in this moment. So yeah, so many things, thoughts.
So should we go to our top 3 aspects of this new moon?
Quick, before you go there, let's bring up the chart. So that way, as
Okay.
we're talking about it, if anyone's watching this on YouTube, they can follow along.
Sure.
And take it away, Monica.
For me, one of the interesting aspects of this new moon is that it's also conjunct Venus. So Venus met up with the sun only 4 days, actually only 2 days before the new moon. So Venus met up with the sun at 14 degrees Gemini in an aspect of conjunction. They met up together, they said hello, they renewed their energies, or the Venus renewed her own energies, started a whole new cycle. And a couple days later, we have a new moon with Venus still so close. So that's one of the aspects that stands out for me. And the fact that this new moon, it's also squaring Saturn from Pisces. So I think those are the 2 kind of aspects that I'm paying attention to at this new moon.
And what's jumping out for you?
One thing is that Saturn is squaring those planets. Another thing is that the nodes are having quite many trines and sextiles. So it's doing some positive aspects to the nodes.
Yeah. I think the thing, just like the last time we were together and we had a big stellium in Taurus, thing that grabs me is the stellium in Gemini, not just the sun and moon there, but so many planets. The fact that the ruler of the dispositor, the ruler of that Gemini energy, Mercury, is moving so fast. So it's a ton of Gemini with a fast moving director at the helm. And then the second thing that really jumps out for me is the contact, the trine between Jupiter, which has now just entered into Gemini, and that Pluto at 1 degree Aquarius, which harkens us back to some things from 2020. So those are my 2 or 3 things that really grab my attention.
So we're jumping into the soup now, as we like to call it. So from my perspective, Venus renewing itself in Sun, that's a big thing. And again, if you follow Venus cycle, that she'll meet up with the sun in the same sign around every 4 years. So the last time Venus was in the same sign, in a sign of Gemini meeting the sun, it was in 2020, in June of 2020. So again, if you know your chart, if you know where Gemini is in your chart, which area of your life, which house, it will be interesting to see if the themes of that house are reappearing again. And maybe actually looking back to the summer of 2020 and seeing what was happening in that area of life in 2020 around love, around money and worth and contracts and relationships. I would be paying close attention to that aspect and journaling on, are there any connections from 2020 or even earlier from 2016 that coming up for me now?
And how do you work with a Venus cazimi in your system? Does it have additional significance in karmic astrology than what we've discussed in the past? Not to put you on
Maybe
the
I'm
spot or
not
anything.
working so much. I'm into those retrograde Venus stuff. When it's retrograding, it's my thing. And when it's stationing and when it's shadow and stuff like that. But Venus cycle, of course, is important. And those cycles, quite long ones. This is still, it's a renewal of the cycle. I remember when there was some astrological like examination of synastry aspects, and Venus Sun was like one of the top aspects in relationships, and it makes sense. And
Yeah.
that was one of the aspects that standed out in many synastry charts. So that was one thing that come to mind with that Venus Sun. But yeah, I think it's good to think back on the cycle, like Monika mentioned, those years, because it might be quite significant and bring back or renew some things around those themes.
Yeah. I think we have a couple of transits over the course of the summer that keep harkening back to 2020 and making this connection between what's happening now with what began then, with that Venus cazimi in Gemini being one of them. I like to think of any planet that's cazimi as that being in the eye of the storm. The storm is swimming all around us, but you're centered, you're right there. And when things are under the beams of the sun, often the energy of that planet, it's hard to access, it's hard to understand. Literally, we can't see it in the sky. It gets blocked out from as it gets close. But at that moment of cazimi, it's right there in the heart of the sun. And I feel like this could be a beautiful moment for a lot of us to really get clarity about what we desire, about how perhaps what we've been trying to attract or draw to us, thinking about a Gemini theme, what we thought we desired, maybe having that clarity of that's not actually what I'm desiring. If you have it transiting through the 6th or the 10th house, maybe I've been chasing this goal with my career. I've been really trying to get to point A, B, C, but when I think about it, what I really desire is to be a service or to there's something else that was behind. What is the motivator for that makes me want the things I desire? And sometimes it's easy to get hooked on the thing I'm attracting. I think sometimes with Venus, we can get caught up with the things and forget about the emotion that started us wanting to draw that thing in. And I also think there could be a big switch here of going from being the person who has to do, I have to do to get what I want. I have to work really hard to make more money. I have to do and be the bee that goes from flower to flower. And Venus, whenever she's cazimi, I'm always have that moment of remembering I'm the flower. I'm not the bee. My job is to open up to the universe, to my higher self. My job is to pull in the things that and to attract what I want, not to go out and create necessarily, but I create by attracting it to me. And so these can be, for me personally, moments of great synchronicity kicks in, or the light bulb goes off, or that just being more willing to stand in a place of receptivity rather than always being in the having to create. And so I'm thinking with it being in Gemini that this could be a great time for some light bulbs going off about suddenly remembering or realizing what is my deep desire? And is that matching the things I'm telling myself I want? I don't know. Just something I think about every time we get a Venus cazimi.
And that Venus cazimi is also speaking to Saturn. So Saturn from Pisces is also talking to that aspect. And I think, again, like you say, there might be this kind of call to spiritual maturity. Saturn in Pisces for me is that spiritual maturity. So again, I like the fact that, Anne, you brought up that Sabian symbol about going from that youthful kind of way of thinking to that more mature approach. And I think this might be, again, reflected in that Saturn square to new moon and square to Venus, and encouraging that deeper look at our desires, deeper look at our connections, deeper look at what we value. Again, things in Gemini can be very surface level. They can just be, hey, we're here for the catch up, for a brief, fun, social thing. There's nothing deep to it. And again, there's no judgment there. We need that. We need that kind of fun, social, loose, free approach as well, often. But I think Saturn in this new moon specifically will draw us a little bit deeper, and it will help us ask those questions. What is it that we value in those connections with that Venus? Do we have maturity? And especially when we were talking earlier about that duality of us, we have a soul and we have a body. How do we actually nurture that spiritual side of us, that side that is in Pisces, that side that needs more than this life embodied on earth, that it needs to nurture our spirit as well? And I think that conversation there between that new moon and Venus in Gemini and that Saturn in Pisces will help at this new moon ask us those questions.
Yeah, that Saturn can actually be very good as a grounding force to when we have a square, we have to do it. When we have a square, we're not getting, even if it's in inflexible signs, so it's more movable that way, but we still have to go to that we can't run away like the way with Pisces. So it can be like an engine for also transforming those energies through the nodes through our direction in life, through seeing maybe the goals. We have a lot of sextiles and trines, and they might be more passive, but when we have Saturn squaring, there's something underneath that might actually make something fruitful of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that what's underneath is probably going to be materializing for many of us in the form of challenges, obstacles, trials, the tribulations of life that forcing us, it almost feels like that the universe forcing us to stop for a moment. Stop with all the mental chatter, stop with all the ideas, stop with the multitasking, maybe stop with all the social media, just stop for a moment. And that stop is going to be in the form of something that uh, is a comeuppance, something where we must, in order to deal with that obstacle, we must refocus. We must use some maturity. We must apply energy to our thinking, to our Gemini minds about how can I use my knowledge, my ideas to get through this. I keep hearing when I was in camp as a young child, we always had a campfire song. I don't know if y'all had it over there or not, but I'm going on a lion hunt, but I don't care. I see a tree. I can't go over it. I can't go under it. I can't go around it. How mutable sign does that sound? I'm going to try to get around, but I can't. So I must go through it. And I feel like I just keep hearing that with the Saturn here, that whatever that obstacle, delay, challenge, the comeuppance in life is, it's necessary. It's a necessary challenge because the process of learning to go through it and resolve it is going to help us maybe tame a bit some of the procrastination or the avoidance or those other things that can happen with so much mutability.
It does. We mentioned that earlier, Kimberly. You mentioned that there's so many echoes in this chart of that 2020, and with Venus in 2020 again renewing itself around summer. In many countries, at least in Europe, we had that brief period after COVID shut down of reopening. So there was this moment of hope and reconnecting. How very Gemini. There was this moment of reconnecting after being locked and being told not to integrate, sorry, not to connect with other people, not to meet with other people. So we had the moment, at least in Europe, where a lot of countries in the summer they had that kind of respite, and they said, okay, we're going to reopen everything before again we shut down. But for me, that kind of echo of 2020 is when the pandemic started in 2020. It was interesting how we reevaluated a lot of our connections, literally. There were families who have not been together because everyone was super busy, and suddenly they had to be in one household all the time, 24/7. And that really made them reevaluate who they are to each other. Very Venus, very Gemini like as well. Sometimes the relationship broke, sometimes the relationship got stronger. But that idea of going deep and say, what do we mean to each other? Do we actually like spending time? Again, it's Gemini. Do we like connecting? Do we like chatting? Do we like spending time with each other? Is it nice and free and fun and loving? Because that's also Gemini. And if it's not, why not? And I think there's in this new moon, there is an echo of that, of 2020 reevaluation of what it is to be connected, what it is to be connected to me and myself, and knowing that I have that relationship with my body and with my spirit, my soul, whatever words you want to put with your higher self. And also the relationships around us. Again, that Saturn with square is just saying to us, are those relationships strong? Can we rely on them? Are those relationships mature? Do they actually give us what we need on that spiritual level? Do they nourish our side? Or do they not? And I think that echo there, that's why I mentioned earlier of looking back what was happening and what themes were coming up for us individually in 2020, because I think there is a strong echo of that and that reevaluation and renewal of some of the relationships that we have, which one are important, will come up here as well.
Yeah. And, the fact that it's not just one planet, right? But we have that's making this aspect to Saturn, but we have the stellium of energy, and several planets within it are with an orb. And so I just feel like there's this, going back to something you shared when we were talking about the moon and Gemini in general, Monica, you shared something about the voice and the need to utilize and to think about our voice. That is a very Gemini theme to me. And so I'm also thinking that this square with Saturn, combined with all this Gemini energy in general, could be saying there's something we need to say, that we have to maybe get over the what is the obstacle that stops me from speaking my truth. And later we'll talk about how Pluto is contacting Jupiter. And I'm thinking speaking our truth to where we have placed the power may be a big thing here. And I think it could be really loud because it feels like this is something that could have started brewing in the summer of 2020 when we were having a lot of protests and marches about Black Lives Matter in response to dismantling police, in response to, there was this, what I desire sometimes is to remove what is unpleasant. It isn't just I desire the pleasant aspects of life. Sometimes in order to get to a better place, we have to deal with the stopping the what is unpleasant, dismantling the things that don't work, as the phrase was used so much that summer. So I just feel like this Gemini energy in general, and then the fact that we've got the expansiveness of Jupiter, using our words of Mercury, the emotional component of the moon. I need to put this out into the world because of the sun. It's about what we do in connection with others, relationship to others of Venus. I mean, you put all that together in one particular archetypal sign, right? There's a message, there's something, and it feels to me like it has to happen on a personal level in our lives. It also has to happen universally. It's both the inner and the outer. And I just want to touch on the fact that if it is a stellium, the ruler of the stellium, Mercury, and the moon, because we're looking at a new moon, so both of them are going to be out of bounds during the next 2 weeks at some point. So as this energy is still reverberating, the out of bounds energy of Mercury for me is always about out of bounds planets are erratic, unpredictable, act not in their normal way often, but there's also an element where this can be the moment of genius, that spark of inspiration that can happen. There's both the pros and the cons here. And so this could be a time in which our emotions are extremely volatile. This could be a time in which our words that normally are the inside voice talking suddenly pop out and become the outside voice. And I think there could be a lot of miscommunication or communication snafus that we might find is adding to the tension with that Saturn, with the people who have the power over us, the ability to set the limits, the conditioning factors of the patriarchal world. I will not go on my feminist soapbox, but you know what? The rules that society has created. Saturn is so focused with how we all work together and the rules we are supposed to live by. And I feel like this could also be saying this huge stellium of Gemini is just pushing, saying, I need to speak out. I need to speak against that rule because that social norm is wrong. And so it'd be real interesting to see how much of that energy from the summer of 2020 repeats either on the same themes or different themes.
One more thing to add, Saturn very often represents our fears as well. So Saturn making that, again, that square to the Venus and Gemini, it's also asking us, what is it that we fear? And is that fear blocking us from speaking up, from connecting, from networking, from saying, like you say, what we want and what we don't want? On a personal, actually, it was the summer of 2020 when I actually signed a contract for to create an Astroluna journal, which again triggered a lot in terms of speaking and connecting. But yeah, I think that, like you say, there might be that element of what is it that we fear. And again, Saturn is in Pisces. So what is it that it's a collective fear that we might feel and might need to vocalize? So should we go to Jupiter and Pluto? Do we have any other aspect that you guys want to talk about?
Do we dare to go there?
I didn't catch that.
Do we dare to do it?
Let's dare.
Let's dare. I wanted to say with Pluto and Jupiter, I don't know if I want to dare them. But it is interesting that they're meeting up, in a sign. And obviously Jupiter and Saturn met up in 0 degree of Aquarius in 2020. So again, that echo of 2020. And that changed a 200-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn meeting up every 20 or so years in one element. So for the next roughly 200 years, we'll have Jupiter and Saturn meeting up in an element of air. And now Pluto is roughly around the same degree where they were in 2020 and speaking to Jupiter. So I feel like, again, this is being pulled into that shift in power, and shift in power from the earthly themes and realms into the air realm. For me, there is no surprise that the discussions around AI and data security and what AI can potentially do or don't do is happening now, because we have the power shift from the things that used to be powerful and meant power and wealth, like literally a castle and heap of gold in a castle that you could take away. Now those castles move potentially online. The data centers and our data like our information is that pile of gold, if you will. The worth is shifting from one element to another. And the power struggle these days is not going to be over the actual earthly materials, but actually, who is it that owns our data? What can we do with that data? What can we do with that information? With AI potentially being able to take our identity, imitate our voice, imitate our look. And already there were talks about spam calls where people were using AI, using someone else's voice to call parents and ask them to transfer money because they're in distress or something. So it's a really interesting shift. Again, there is something that's happening in the background with with Jupiter, with Zeus, with the god of Olympus, and with Pluto, with the god of Hades, with the god of underworld, where they are shifting power. They are looking at the world and they're cutting it the way they want it. And they talk to each other in very harmonious way. And we've said on this podcast numerous times that harmonious aspects don't necessarily mean good aspects. They just mean that it's easier for those two powers to come together and plan and cut the world, or the future, the history, the way they want it, and they don't have to ask anyone else for permission. So there is a slight shift here in that archetypal power.
Totally a shift. And what's interesting, this is the second time that Jupiter is making a contact, making an aspect to that 0 degrees Aquarius that was so important in 2020. Right. First, in November of 2020, it had done the conjunction with Pluto, and then in December, it did that conjunction with Saturn, all at that 0 degree point. And I feel like even as planets move, that point just retains its energy. It has an echo. And last year, May of 2023, Jupiter squared as it entered Taurus, it squared that point. And now we're seeing it's making a trine, not only to that point, but to Pluto that's currently hanging out there. So I think there's some tie-ins between what was happening last May, what's happening now. Last May was the tension, and I remember last summer, so many people were echoing, I feel like we're going backwards. I feel like we're moving in reverse. I feel that the spring was very optimistic. During the spring of 23, we had a momentary pause where Pluto had first entered Aquarius for about, was it 6 weeks, 7 weeks, that it was there before it retrograded back. So we had this kind of idea, hope, freshness, future thinking for the first time in many years. And then summer came and that went away. And it felt very oppressive and everything felt like it was not moving the way we want. Kind of an expansion of the tension as it was in Taurus making that square. And now here we have the trine energy of, again, a return to hope, but now I think on the other side. But it's not necessarily easy. Lately, as I look at Pluto's journey through Aquarius, especially in these early days as it's crossing over and retrograding and crossing back, I keep thinking about the analogy of the butterfly. It's hard not to think of Pluto transformation and go to butterfly in this day and age. It's so over marketed. But what I really keep thinking about is that final phase. And I think I talked about this in our last podcast or recently. The final phase, when the butterfly has already formed, the caterpillar has died, it has become the goo, it is formed, it is a butterfly, but it has to push its way out of that cocoon in order to force the blood into the wing so that it can fly. It can be a butterfly and not fly. Right? There's a difference between that. And that's what I'm sensing here is this energy of what is that final push? We've looked under the carpet. We've looked at the dirt. We've spoken out against power, collectively speaking, over the last 4 years. We've done some of this work. But that final phase is, but what do I really desire? Venus Kazemi. What is it that's stopping me? That square to Saturn. What is it that I need to expand? What is it about reclaiming my own sense of personal power? What is it that I want to do? But it can be scary. Monica, you mentioned that for you, Saturn is about fear a lot of the times. And I would agree with that. But I also feel like for me, it's always Pluto. Pluto is not the thing that scares me externally. It's the thing that scares me to my bones, so I don't look at it. I don't have a fear because I never want to look at it. It's that it's life changing and I can never go back, and that is frightening. But I feel like this is also the time of opportunity because Jupiter tends to bring the teachers, the guides, the mentors, and sometimes just the plain out opportunity. So if we are willing to seize the moment, seize the day, and take advantage of the opportunities that are before us, especially things that are moving us into a new way of living, a new way of thinking. What is it that I have done? Let's not do it the way we've done it before. Let's embrace a new mindset, a parallel shift onto a different track. I feel like this is so strong in pushing us to think differently, to think about how we want to live our lives differently. And it isn't just about, I'm leaving this job for this job. It's a major shift. It's a major shift in our homes, in our careers, in our partnerships. And everyone I'm talking to right now, not surprisingly, is telling me how they're getting married, they're getting divorced, they're buying a home, they're selling a home, they're moving to another state, like they're changing jobs, but they're going into a totally different field. It's so exciting to see that everybody's repositioning themselves onto a new track. And I personally feel that a lot of this month, it's about repositioning ourselves onto this new track because at the end of summer, in August, is when we'll have the third event that takes us back to 2020. That will be when Jupiter squares Saturn for the first time since their conjunction. So it almost feels like this is the summer of getting ourselves repositioned on the things we're going to do going forward. Because after that, it's takeoff. It's takeoff for the fall and next year. And there's not going to really be the time to make those shifts. It's like we got to work with wherever we're at. It's like the start button of the race goes, and now we're moving forward. So yeah, so to echo Anne, I do dare. I'm really thinking right now about what do I want to expand, and if it doesn't scare me, then it's not the thing I need to expand. I'm really embracing what are the things that make me apprehensive that I want to do, not just do it because it scares me. I'm not going on a roller coaster, but what do I want? And I hold myself back because of that little thought of what if. That to me is the kind of fear that's a Pluto fear. But what if the sky falls? What if it does? What if? So I'm really trying to push myself and encourage others to push themselves to say, but are there opportunities to help you get to that place? And let's work with them. And what are your
And
thoughts?
we might get an opportunity quite soon when Mars is squaring Pluto from Taurus.
Ooh, that's right.
We're in the square now, but from a fixed sign to a fixed sign. And there we can have a bit of an engine for Pluto, Jupiter also.
Yeah, and we should be feeling that pretty soon as it builds
Yeah.
up, getting close to that point, because Mars enters Taurus on the 8th, just like 2 days after the new moon.
And that might be a bit of a cute vibe with that Mars when it's still on those last degrees of Aries, and maybe a bit too pushy there before it enters Taurus too. So it might be good to remember.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be a very good time to remember to think before we leap with all that Gemini energy. So is there anything else we want to break out from this chart that feels major? Because I know the three of us could go on and on for a long time looking at all the nuances, but anything else strong that you feel we need to talk about? So if not, are we ready to go into our tips?
Happy to go into our tips. Like you say, there's always so much to unpack. But I think if we would do that, it will take 3 to 4 hours podcast. There's And also there are things that we will be talking again, like Jupiter. We were just talking about Jupiter going into Gemini on the last podcast. So I think it's worth going back and reminding ourselves about that, because that's something that supports that, obviously, that stellium that you were talking about, Kimberly, but that only happens once every 12 years. So Jupiter being in Gemini, kind of giving a bit more oomph to this, that definitely has an impact on this new moon. But I think, yeah, we can probably just jump into tips for this new moon.
Would you like to start?
I can. Yeah, I have very simple one. So from my perspective, we're talking again about Gemini and about Venus. So for me, it will be very much a new moon about that might sound really bad, but about reevaluating my relationships and actually having a new moon with potentially spending with the people that I value, I hold in high esteem. I have a lot of love for them, and actually having that new moon a bit more light and have fun with those people and just spending a really lovely social new moon and enjoying their company. Not every moon has to be with affirmation, with the ritual. Sometimes actually spending time with those that we love, and especially on a new moon where Venus is present, that's already ritual in itself. Sharing food, sharing drink, and just sharing stories. Again, very Gemini, sharing our stories. It will be something that I'll be looking to do at this new moon.
Beautiful.
That sounds good. I have also a really simple tip for this moon that's connected to Mercury, and that's to remember to breathe. Just to, when everything's overwhelming, that there's a lot of ideas and a lot of everything's fast, then just remember to ground yourself and breathe and be in the moment.
That's a good one.
That is a really
I
good
need to
one.
remember. Thanks, Anne.
I have two, typical Gemini fashion, right? Can't have just one, have to have two. One is about the expansive side of the mind of Gemini, and one is about the shadow of focus. So the first one is this is a great day to brainstorm, expand your ideas. However, you like to do that. For some of us, it's making a list. For other people, it could be doing a vision board. For others, it might be sitting and talking out loud with people who are your sounding boards. And what list do you need to make? What is it that we're brainstorming on? That would probably be indicative of where this Gemini stellium is hitting your chart. What house do you have Gemini in? That might give us an idea of this is a great time to brainstorm about something related to the themes of that house. The other is I think this is a great time to begin mindfulness practice of some sort. We need to develop that muscle of being able to focus, of not just being, life is moving faster, as several of us shared. Time seems to be speeding up. Things are not always going according to plan. There are often obstacles to our daily schedule. It is important to be able to maintain focus and not be pulled by all the ideas or the latest, ooh, squirrel idea that floats before us. So I think the best way to do that is mindfulness, whether that's mindful breathing, mindful eating is always my favorite. I try to every morning dedicate 5 minutes to eating an orange, which drives me crazy to spend that much time. And I realize that in the scheme of mindfulness practice, 5 minutes is actually pretty short compared to people who do this a lot. But for me, that's my stretch. So find that thing, whether that you can just do mindfully, mindful walking, just begin. It isn't about doing it at an expert level. It's begin the practice of dedicating a few minutes a day, because new moons are a great time to begin something where we want to just practice the art of focus and holding all the ideas that are trying to work their way in, putting a pin in them for a moment, resting them on a cloud, knowing we can pick them up when we're done, and just hold that focus for a few minutes and develop the muscle of being able to do that. So I think that's our wrap up then for this new moon. Feel free to join us in 2 weeks when we look at the upcoming full moon, which I'm sure will be very exciting as well. Don't forget, if you haven't already, set yourself some type of reminder, either on your podcast platform, on YouTube, hit the bells, the likes, the reminders, so that you can join us when we're here. And in the meantime, during the next 2 weeks, feel free to email us or hop on to YouTube and put some comments in the chat discussion in the comments, because we love to hear how you are working with this and keep the conversation going. Until then, bye. Okay, somewhere here I have a stop button. Oh, there it is. Thank you for joining us in this week's AstroChat. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion and would love to hear about anything that resonated with you. Keep the conversation going by posting shareable content on our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube pages. You can also email us at astrochatpodcast@gmail.com. AstroChat is uploaded every 2 weeks on the Saturday before each new and full moon. Look for us on your favorite podcast platform as well as on YouTube. You can support AstroChat and receive exclusive content by donating on our Patreon page. We look forward to chatting with you all again at the next lunation of the moon.